Well, on Monday, I took my beautiful wife, Natasha, out to Joshua Tree National Park here, just not too far east of Los Angeles. And there I saw something that might be sort of indicative of the age. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, there's nothing like being out in the middle of the absolute baking desert with nothing but dead things everywhere as far as the eye can go. Just rocks and burned out pieces of grass on a long hiking trail. And here come two people, and they are half a mile away, and they are both wearing masks against COVID-19 in a 9-mile breeze. And I wanted to scream, learn something about titration and viral load. But nevertheless, I did not. Now, I was going to bring a gun into the park, but I didn't do that. And the reason I didn't bring a gun was because it says right here on the National Park Service website, visitors should not consider firearms as protection from wildlife. You haven't seen my firearms. But that doesn't mean I wasn't fully armed. It doesn't mean I wasn't fully armed, because I was expecting a Karen or two to tell me, why aren't you wearing a mask? I wasn't wearing a mask. And now we get to the point. Texas has announced that, as in the days of a republic, the state was no longer going to mandate wearing of masks or any of that stuff. They were going to leave that up to the individual citizens and businesses to make up their own mind, almost as if it was a Republic of Adults or some other wacky, nutty idea. The mammoth Michigan manatee of mendacity weighed in on this, and he basically, I'm not going to mention his name because there's another M alliteration, and I'm not really in the mood for it. Okay, it was Michael Moore. Michael Moore said, okay, Texans, you want to go without the masks? That's great. Knock yourselves out. No vaccine for you. And the reply to that was this graph that you can see right here. This is the infection rate, fatality rate for Texas. And you can see that in the last couple of days or weeks, it hasn't just declined. It's just plain dropped off the map. All of this to say simply one thing. We are, as we talked about last week on our show with herd immunity, we are coming out of this, and that graph is as clear an example of it as anything else could be. And as we emerge from this, we're going to see once again two different Americas. We're going to see mask-wearing America and mask-burning America. Steve, I was overjoyed to see people having a mask-burning small ceremony up in Boise, Idaho. Where there are a lot of sensible people. And a reporter, I think from the New York Times, tweeted, I'll never understand why masks are such a divisive issue. Somebody replied, well, you told us to wear them, then not wear them, and so on. This has long since departed the realm of the rational, hasn't it, Steve? This whole reaction now is really ideologically driven, wouldn't you say?
You know, I like to go camping every summer, and one of the reasons I love to go camping is that you are away from everything. One of the things you can get away with, or get away from, I should say, is things like mask mandates, because you are out in the woods or you're out in the desert or wherever you happen to be. You're far away from other people and all that other good stuff, and you can pretty much do whatever you want. And life's a little harder, but it's also adventurous when you have to get up in the morning and build a fire if you want to have coffee or eat or anything like that. I love that. So when you tell me that you've got two people out in the desert hiking, wearing masks against a disease that primarily strikes the obese and the vitamin D deficient, well, I'm thinking they're hikers in the desert. They're not obese. They got plenty of vitamin D. This is
they're
madness.
In their 20s.
Yeah. Oh, and they're in their 20s, of course. So it's just madness. It's the most depressing part of it is how many people have embraced the nanny state as something virtuous, and that bothers me. But it has led me to thinking about a national divorce. The problem is, it's not like the Civil War, and I don't want to fight anybody. Clearly, I don't want to have a war. That'd be terrible. The Civil War, in a sense, was easier, though, because the main issue dividing us was geographically based. You had these number of slave states that are all clumped together, and a number of free states that were also clumped together. And so you had fairly clear dividing lines, except, for some border regions like Missouri, which had its own mini Civil War, but that's not germane here. If we were to try and divorce this country, there are no clear lines. It's pretty much the cities and blue enclaves versus the rest of us, which is mostly suburbs and rural areas. So I got to thinking, what we need is a new sort of two countries in one place. We let the blue places go out on their own. We go out on our own. And we'll have a mutual defense pact, not that the blue states or blue cities, whatever we're going to call them, will have a military. They'll just cancel all that spending. So we'll have to carry our weight there. But we'll be able to afford it because we'll be so much richer once we have the smaller government that we've longed for all these decades. So here's my plan. My plan is we have our own country, which is geographically most of the country, population-wise a little bit less than half. We keep the same Constitution basically, except between every sentence, there's a little thing in parentheses that says, and we mean it. And that would be the only change I'd actually make to the Constitution. Other than the name, we couldn't keep the same names. We're divesting ourselves of all these blue areas. So we could call ourselves maybe the Federated States of America, which is it sounds a little more formal. I kind of like it. It says what we are. And then the blue cities and blue enclaves that go their own way, they could be the United States of Karen.
Yeah. That's what I was fully enamored up for was for an onslaught of Karens. That's why I'd had that graph from Texas handy and some other weapons as well. Scott, when I'm out on forget being on the trail, we are coming out of this. People are being vaccinated daily, as you well know, and herd immunity and all the rest of it. Again, that chart from Texas is just devastating to the idea that this is something that is going to go on forever. It's pretty much burned its way out now. My inclination on the trail when I saw people with masks, if I had gotten into a confrontation, because I wasn't wearing one and neither was Natasha, I wanted to say, I'll tell you what, you don't prohibit me from wearing a mask and I won't make you come out on the trail. How's that sound? I mean, that's really it. There just seems to be, let me rephrase this for you, Scott. Do you think that this fear porn, because that's what it's been, it's never been about the actual data, never. Do you think that this fear porn has really changed the way half of America thinks in general, or do you think that they were already kind of wired that way and just waiting for something like COVID to come along and give them a reason to stay indoors and not go to football games or movies or restaurants and be proud of it?
I think we're going to be in for a rough couple of weeks or months here as we transition back to some degree of what we used to call normal. Although back then we didn't, we had our complaints about what was going on before this new abnormality hit. So nothing will ever be normal. But I think we're going to have some hard times because a lot of people look at what the government says as kind of the way it is. And so when the governor of a state says, yes, you've got to wear masks and there are occupancy limits on businesses and, different kinds of businesses that can't operate and things like that, that is considered to be, a commandment with weight. When the governor steps back and says, at this point, we've got the cases are dropping off, deaths are dropping off, vaccinations are going way up. We've got plenty of PPE on hand. Our hospitals aren't overwhelmed. And so from the state's perspective, we're not going to impose any kind of mandates. Now, local counties and municipalities can still take action based on guidelines about how emergency room and ICUs and things like that are handling any kind of patient load. And businesses can make up their own minds as well, which is how I thought that they should have handled it from the beginning.
Absolutely.
It would have been messy, yes. I mean, because there would have been inconsistency from place to place. But no business wants to become a super spreader event. I mean, that's just not good for business. And so I think most businesses probably would have followed the CDC guidelines, basically, for distancing and mask wearing and things like that. out of an abundance of caution to make sure that they were taking care of their employees, didn't incur additional medical expenses, didn't lose staffing, didn't have a reputation in the community as being a place where people got sick. So if you just leave the people to their own devices without the intervention of government, then I think most people and most business owners will make reasonable decisions. It's going to get tough, especially in Texas now, because as of Wednesday, the 10th of March, the governor's, said he's lifted the state mandate, and a lot of people are going to think that means that anywhere you go in Texas, you don't have to wear a mask. That's not true. Almost all major retailers and many minor retailers have said, no, we still want to have our customers and our employees wearing masks. And to me, it's a good illustration of what government can do and what government shouldn't do. I don't have a problem with the Centers for Disease Control issuing guidelines based on the best research that they have at the time, realizing that's always subject to change, and saying, we recommend. Here is what the science is saying. We recommend you maintain social distancing. We recommend you don't gather in groups of so-and-so. We recommend these things. It's an entirely different thing when a president or a governor or a mayor says, we forbid, we mandate. And I think that's really the difference between progressives and conservatives is the progressives want that very hands-on, top-down leadership that says you must not, when conservatives are saying let the people make the decisions for themselves based on the best science they can get a hold of, and we're okay with having the government do basic research and things that we can to help us better understand that will benefit the whole country. So if we can get back more to that sort of, for want of a better term, the CDC model of guidance and less of the top-down mandates, I think we'll all be better off.
Well, I ended up picking this topic for one reason, really, and that was to present to you this following set of tweets. As we all know, and as Scott mentioned, we'll record this on Tuesday, but on March 10th, Texas is going to basically say the state of Texas is no longer issuing mandates. It will be up to individual counties and businesses and so on. When this announcement was made, California Governor Gavin Newsom tweeted that this was absolutely reckless. Associated Press says, breaking, Texas is lifting its mask mandate, making it the largest state to end an order intended to prevent the spread of the coronavirus, and so on, to which Gavin Newsom, California governor, replies, absolutely reckless. Now, we all know that Gavin Newsom basically decided to have an indoor dinner event with a bunch of fundraisers. I think it was his birthday. And so the biggest sting in the history of Twitter has ever occurred, in my opinion. Gavin Newsom tweets that removing the mask mandate from Texas is, quote, absolutely reckless, to which Clinton Duncan, my new all-time favorite human being, replied, which restaurant did you tweet this from? Here's the thing about this that is really, really, really the issue. Gavin Newsom went out to the French Laundry restaurant with health care officials, and at the height of the pandemic, he and 9 other people were in an enclosed space, shoulder to shoulder, having a lovely conversation. That tells me that Gavin Newsom and the healthcare officials and every single person there who was responsible for making policy had an extremely accurate idea of just exactly how risky this virus was. Because if Gavin Newsom really believed what he said, he wouldn't be at a restaurant indoors, not wearing a mask. He'd be listening to his own advice because he would believe his own advice. Glenn Reynolds at Instapundit has put this better than anyone has ever put it, and it doesn't just apply to COVID-19. Glenn says, when the people who are telling me that something is a crisis start acting like it's a crisis, then I'm going to believe it's a crisis. For Gavin Newsom to sit indoors without a mask is an indication that Gavin Newsom is doing what every single American citizen should be allowed to do. He is making his own risk-reward assessment. He's looking at his age, he's looking at his health, he's looking at his access to health care, he's looking at how many beds are available, whether he can be treated or not, and he's making his own decision. But that's not for the little people. That's just for the nobility, for the highborn. Of all of the people who understood this, it was Elon Musk. When he went to reopen his Tesla plant, he basically took a tweet from Gavin Newsom and said, here's what the state is predicted for these months. Here's what they predict for April 5th. Here's what they predict for April 10th. And here down at the bottom is the actual data. But actual data never mattered during the COVID crisis. What mattered was government projections. What mattered was absolute control. What mattered was compliance. And what mattered was an incessant, endless fear that was just constantly generated by the news media. And now when this thing blows through, we're going to find out who did the thinking for themselves and who feels responsible for being able to control their own lives versus who feels like this is not up to me. When Dr. Fauci says I can take the mask off, then I can take the mask off. If Dr. Fauci had been proven completely reliable and accurate, you might have a case there, but he hasn't been. Adults need to think for themselves. And most importantly of all, the idea that you can go out into the world with zero risk at any time is the serious pandemic that is sweeping through Western culture right now. Everything is a risk, everything. And everything is a reward. And the ability to weigh these things and judge them is what adults do and free people do. And I'm looking forward to being able to be both of those things again in the not too distant future. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week right here on Right Angle.